Maybe we should start with that book, Must Labour Always Lose? Tell me about the title.
Very, very simple. I'm sitting on and facing about 2.5 million words of diaries I kept every night as an MP and minister. I haven't tried to rush them out. A lot of details of being with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, Robin Cook, and the rows and the tensions.
John Prescott.
And Preza, of course. But I suddenly woke up and realised I have spent, reveal my age, 50 years in this Labour Party. And in those 50 years, we won elections in just 4 of them. 1974, 1997, 2001, 2005. I stood in all of those elections. More successfully in the last 3 than when I was a little boy standing in Solihull in 1974. And I just thought, this is crazy. This is a terrible record. And the Labour Party, my party, discusses lots of things, the personalities, Jeremy Corbyn, Tony Blair, go left, go right, tax, don't tax, what to do. But it never sits down and says, why are we such crap politicians at winning? And I think we should start discussing why we always lose. And maybe we could clear away, and it's not like a left point or a right point, some of the simple, not so simple mistakes that have kept us so long in opposition and so little in government.
How much of it is about choosing the right leader?
I'm afraid it's enormous. We're not a presidential system, but in effect, you voted for Margaret Thatcher, you voted for Tony Blair, you couldn't bear the idea of voting for Jeremy Corbyn. You weren't that keen on Boris Johnson, but you weren't going to have Jeremy Corbyn running the country, period. Now, the Conservative Party are ruthless at cutting the legs and head off a leader. Margaret Thatcher, biggest election victory in 1987. 3 years later, out she goes. Anthony Eden, out she goes. Ted Heath, out he goes.
Yeah.
We hang on to them. Clement Attlee, ancient history, he calls a stupid election in 1951, loses. He's old, he's done 10 years in government during the war and afterwards. Great accomplishments to his name. But then he stays on as leader. I was in the Parliamentary Labour Party Monday night meeting when people were crying on their knees asking Gordon Brown to step down. Not that people didn't admire him, he's a great politician. Yeah. They knew he was a loser. I don't want to get into the Corbyn business. It's not a finger-pointing book.
Yeah. And the problems go beyond Corbyn.
Oh, very much so. But Jeremy must have known he couldn't possibly win. And yet, why? He's a nice guy. He's a friendly enough guy. I've never had unpleasant words with him in my life. Why didn't he have the sort of moral courage to say, I'm not going to win, and I'll stand down and let somebody better position possibly...
Although he would take the view that he was undersold when it came to the 2017 election and performed admirably well.
But, I'm sorry, we got 50 seats fewer than Theresa May. I mean, Theresa May is, by most working definitions, the most god-awful Prime Minister as a sort of managerial Prime Minister. David Cameron, if Lord North, you remember him in the 18th century, he wasn't on your show, but he lost America. David Cameron lost Europe. With that stupid decision to
gave it up, some would say.
To his stupid decision, it was his decision. He didn't read my book explaining why we would leave Europe if we had a plebiscite. But Theresa May still got 50 more seats than Jeremy Corbyn. That should have been the warning signal. And we ought to... It's horrible, I know. I mean, never thought Neil Kinnock was going to win in 1992. But, you know, St Neil, I love him dearly myself. I knew Michael Foot, most lovable politician you could ever hope to meet. A man
of integrity, a huge intellect.
A great writer, very funny, warm, I mean, throws his arms around you.
Great duffel coat.
Great everything. I remember he was at one of Ian Dale's political bookshop at the time on Victoria Street and was launching a book, and there was Michael in his 80s. He's coming out and probably a bit doddery. And I say, Michael, can I get you a cab? back to Hampstead. No, number 24 bus, look, it's just coming there, it's good enough for me. And he sort of stumbles onto it and goes back up to Hampstead.
I grew up in that area and I used to see him on the lower level of the 24 bus reading the Evening Standard.
Yes. And he was a great writer for the Evening Standard. Yeah. He wrote the obituary of Kemal Ataturk, who was the great leader of Turkey, who created modern Turkey after the First World War, danced with women on film, was seen drinking, told all the men they had to take off their fezzes, said the women didn't have to be veiled. He was one of the greatest figures of early 20th century history. And Michael wrote, a whole page obit in the Evening Standard for him. Evening Standard, he's so much history.
But isn't the problem with Labour as a movement that it's always been an organisation and a community that has talked to itself, and that very often in the choice of leader, they've chosen a sort of spiritual leader, a sort of philosophical leader that represents their ideals, whereas the Tories are cynical and just elect a Prime Minister?
I couldn't agree more. It's why I would like us to discuss power. I mean, there are many fine books on Labour, why people vote one way or another.
Well, the Tory backbenchers didn't like Margaret Thatcher when she was elected in the mid-70s as leader of the Conservative Party. They weren't fans of hers at all, but they considered her the best of a bad lot. And it's only when she started winning for the Tories that she became popular within her own party. Similarly, David Cameron. I mean, I think that a lot of Tories held their nose when they voted for him as leader, but he was a successful leader too.
Well, he was very, very cynical, David. He
won a couple of elections.
He got, he had to go into a coalition with the Lib Dems. I mean, for the Tories to get into the bed with the Lib Dems, I mean, that was so painful. All those little jobs and red boxes they couldn't have for the horrible Lib Dems. But David won the leadership by cutting a deal with Liam Fox on the basis of the first Brexit. It's what I call the political Brexit, of leaving the Angela Merkel party and the Jacques Chirac party, all the centre-right parties. And David Davis told me, Liam Fox came to him and said, will you give me this pledge? And David told me, look, I was much more Eurosceptic than David Cameron. I knew Europe, I didn't like it. But it was preposterous, the idea that a great party like the Conservative Party should break all links with sister parties. And David Cameron said, where do I sign?
But David Cameron, by doing that deal and by granting a referendum to the British people, he neutralised UKIP, which is what helped him to form an overall majority with the Lib Dems and have the coalition government.
Well, forgive me.
Kept Labour out of power.
Labour, David, I talked to all the candidates all the people who wanted to be leader of the Labour Party in 2010. I loved Ed Miliband, we all do, but I voted for David Miliband.
That's another example. They chose the wrong brother.
No, I'm not sure that it would have made any difference. I mean, David has got huge qualities. I'd sit listening to him for hours.
Yeah.
But was he a politician? I beg leave to just pose that question.
He can't have been worse than his brother, though, can he?
I really don't think, sadly. I mean, I felt very sorry for all the children of Blair and Brown. I mean, in the sense that David was Blair's protégé, Ed was Gordon's protégé. But as I said to David at the time, look, Dave, you know me, I'm the Euro bore of the party. There's no known example in European history or Canada or Australia where a party of the left, the Labour Party, loses power and then comes back at the next election. It's a law of gravity. It's impossible. And he said, oh, Dennis, well, thank you very much. I said, well, I thought you ought to know. Well, there's no way. Parties don't win, come straight back to power.
Isn't it ironic, Dennis, that it was always Europe that threatened to destroy the Conservative Party, this great split between, the pro-Europeans in the Tory party and the Eurosceptics, or the bastards, as they were known by John Major, of course. Is it the case that whilst it was feared that Europe would destroy the Tories, it's actually made the Tories, it's unified them, and it's broken Labour? Because there are many people that watch this programme who previously voted for Labour, who will never forgive Jeremy Corbyn, and in particular the current leader, Keir Starmer, for his Brexit policy, which was to demand a second referendum. So do you think that ultimately it's Brexit that have done for Labour?
No, I think what's done for Labour was that, as I said, we had our 13 great years, just as the Tories had 18 great years, and then they were out of power for 13 years. And I'm afraid that's how cycles
But the Brexit
move.
policy was a disaster, wasn't it? I mean, what Keir Starmer should have done is just, and of course Jeremy Corbyn himself, ironically a Eurosceptic, should have said, right, we accept the result, we're going to crack on, we'll make a success of global Britain. And instead, the architect of Labour's Brexit policy going into the election in 2019 the architect was Keir Starmer, and it was to push for a second referendum.
Well, it's very funny you say that, because Andrew Adonis, who is chair of the European movement, a Labour peer, a strong pro-European, he wrote at the time that Sir Keir Starmer was a Brexiter. Eurosceptic, and that was his view. Being, I don't know if he was in the shadow cabinet. I mean, I wasn't really paying much attention to it. Look, Europe, it's like the Irish question in the 19th century. It's like the free trade question. Yes, it divides parties badly, but the one thing you can't do is just take Britain. Winston Churchill did a lovely broadcast in the 1930s. People are saying that we were too close to Europe and all our problems are coming from Europe. But, ladies and gentlemen, we can't up anchor and go away and drop anchor off Canada. Europe is part of what we are.
And Margaret Thatcher said the same thing.
So Margaret Thatcher is almost my heroine on Europe. She forced through the single market. She was the first woman to talk about a common security and foreign policy. She quadrupled the British contribution to the European budget. She supported...
She believed in free trade, but she wouldn't have been happy to see how the project evolved.
No, on the contrary. She was the woman who pushed through the single market, which abolished all the national vetoes. When she came back from Fontainebleau in 1984, Jack Straw, bright young MP, newly elected, says, is it not the case, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister's returned from her European summit and hold down the Union Jack and hold up the white flag of surrender to Europe? His complaint was she was supporting enlargement and freedom of movement. The enlargement countries then were very poor: Spain, Portugal, Greece, a bit like we think of Poland and Slovakia and so on.
Yeah.
And she said, no, the Honourable Gentleman's quite wrong. These are poor countries. We must help them, give them money and open them up to British trade and British influence and allow them to grow, and that helps us to grow.
But she would never have accepted a single European currency for the UK. She would never have accepted free movement or the Schengen Agreement.
Oh, I'm
she
sorry,
would never have
did.
accepted jurisdiction of European courts, and she would never have accepted...
Mark, I was terribly sorry. She was always running to the European courts to get the European courts to tell the Italians or the French or whatever to obey British ideas. On freedom of movement.
Freedom of movement. Margaret Thatcher would have supported that.
She was delighted to see foreigners coming into the country.
So are you suggesting that she would not have backed Brexit right now?
It's absolutely fascinating. I've really tracked her career so closely. I think she thought that the problem of Europe with Nigel Lawson and Geoffrey Howe, this is really ancient history now, did for her, and she turned very sour against it, that is for sure. No, she wouldn't have accepted a single currency, nor as any British Prime Minister. That's fine, I mean, that's their decision.
Well, your mate, Tony Blair, tried to make it happen.
No, he didn't. Tony Blair promised a referendum. Mark, I was there. One of the big myths, I had a long piece in the New Statesman about this last week,
so is that
Gordon Brown stopped or the enlargement, the so-called transition period. But no, Blair promised a referendum on the idea of joining the single currency and EMU for the 1997 election. I was there in the Foreign Office for 8 years. Nobody ever suggested holding a referendum. Blair wasn't nuts. Of course he knew what a referendum on Europe would be.
No, but he pushed for the single currency.
He didn't.
A historian will tell you that it was Gordon Brown that created the 5 tests that could never be achieved. So essentially, Gordon Brown blocked us joining the euro, which makes him a national hero.
You are believing all the myths. I remember Ed Ball telling me in a discussion with David Miliband, asking about the 5 tests, and Ed said, oh, God, yeah, I mean, I wrote them. I keep forgetting what they are.
On the back of a fag packet.
They were just a way of buying time, what we're always brilliant at in government, to waste some time, because none of them always asked the question, were they prepared to hold a referendum, which was a manifesto promise. You couldn't get out of it. Answer, no, because Blair knew And the only reason I wrote my book saying in 2014, if we have a referendum, we'll lose it. I'm not particularly clairvoyant. Every country in Europe just about that held a referendum on the European question, the French, the Dutch, the Swedes, the Irish and so on, it was rejected. So why Cameron didn't even just read the papers and understand? I mean, if he wanted us to leave Europe, that was fine. To go back to your early point, he didn't new to UKIP. Nigel Farage could never win a seat in Parliament. He's brilliant.
But he must have dampened the Eurosceptic vote by putting a manifesto pledge to give people a referendum.
No, he'd already won, as you rightly said. He didn't get quite enough seats. He had to go into coalition with the Lib Dems in 2010 without that. And so, yes, I'm sure it helped. But it wasn't determinate. I mean, Labour was not coming back in 2015, be very clear. So the big Prime Minister, Prime Ministers are always pestered by true believers who tell me, if only you do this, the League of Empire Loyalists, if only you quit this alliance, if only you ban this thing, all will be well. And a big Prime Minister has to sort of smell the entire nation. Right now, I'm not crowing over it because anything that damages Britain. But Brexit ain't going very well at the moment. Every Prime Minister from Europe...
Almost 70 trade deals around the world, including Australia and New Zealand, Japan.
Cut and paste.
A US trade deal in the offing. Fantastic vaccine rollouts.
Well, France has vaccinated more people than we have. Other countries have done just as well.
But not before an absolute diplomatic crisis over the availability of jabs from AstraZeneca.
No, that's certainly... that's a real problem, I agree. The United States... Food and Drug Administration, the world benchmark on what could be used in vaccines, still won't license AstraZeneca. I think they're wrong, completely wrong. And there was a fuss, it was very stupid. And then Macron sent out his Prime Minister to be vaccinated by the Mark Dolan of France live on French television with AstraZeneca. And now France is caught up. But what we're finding out, of course, is it ain't over. So all that world-beating boosterism, we're conquering the world, it's not really working.
Well, the trade deals are still in the pipeline, of course, and, fantastic exports post-pandemic, hopefully. Let's talk about your book. It's called Must Labour Always Lose? And let's power through a few questions. Got great viewer questions, and I also want to just tap into your entire career in politics. First of all, do you rate Keir Starmer? Can he win for Labour?
Yes, in the sense that I think pendulum swing... we're now into year 11 of a Conservative government. I think most people would agree that by any definition of character, there's a famous Greek philosopher called Heraclitus. I'm sorry, it's a bit later in the evening to quote Greek philosophers.
Never too late for me.
One that Boris Johnson, I'm sure, studied at Oxford and Eton. And he said 2,500 years ago, character is destiny. And nobody can look at our Prime Minister's character. I actually like Boris very much. We've always got on very well with him. But character, ethics, truth-telling, loyalty, fidelity, morality, come on.
We're electing a Prime Minister, not the Archbishop of Canterbury.
I think some people, and actually probably many more Tory voters than possibly Labour voters, do think character counts. And so if it comes, who was more uninterested in the world than Clement Attlee? And yet he was triumphed over the biggest figure in British political history forever, Boris Churchill, Winston Churchill. Yeah. And so if it comes to straight up-down choice, I'm not sure it will, just like Joe Biden was written off by all the right-wingers in America as sort of boring and a bit old, I think Starmer's...
How's that playing out for you?
Well, I'm very keen on age not being a barrier to future life.
Well, on that, I can agree, and frankly, I wish you were leader of the free world right now, not Joe Biden, because you are clearly enjoying 100% mental acuity, which is why I'm going to put some questions for my brilliant audience to you.
Pleasure.
Sean on Twitter, Dennis, wants to know, should there have been a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty?
Sean, I'm so is there anything more boring in the world than say, I'm so glad you asked that question? Yes. I really believe now, I didn't believe then, I wish we had a referendum like the French and the Dutch did on the Constitutional Treaty, you remember that in 2005?
Yep.
On the Lisbon Treaty, like the Irish did. I think we would have voted no to it, and there'd have been a crisis, but we'd have found a solution, and we'd have learnt the lesson that putting these things to a plebiscite never produces a satisfactory solution. But instead, we sort of built up all that tension over Europe, over immigration, over EMU, over financial austerity, over the financial crisis, the treatment of the Greeks, Mrs. Merkel letting in all the Muslim people from Libya and Syria and Iraq. All that came together. No council houses, the poverty in working class areas. Do you know, between 1997 and 2009, you want a stat? A bit late, but here it is, 495,000 council houses were sold on the Labour watch. In Yorkshire and Humber, my region, we built 24 council houses. We were stoking up such resentment amongst our own voters because we weren't giving them that which, for the previous 40 years, was seen as the God-given right of a worker, a decent council house. And then it blew up. I mean, it blew us away in 2010. It blew us away again in 2015. And then when the referendum came, they just spanked us hard because we weren't listening.
And I wonder whether the Labour Party needs to be more pro-global Britain, more patriotic. Lots of emails coming in. Peter has said, Mark, I think you're spot on. I was a Labour voter, but I will not vote for them again because of their position on Brexit and the fact that they wanted another referendum. It was undemocratic and unacceptable to people who believe in democracy. Dennis is speaking from the inside of the Labour Party, and that is Labour's problem. They've lost touch with working class voters. Also, strong words from Mary on why Labour lose. Labour lose because they don't listen. And what's more, they ignore the message when they do lose. The simple fact is that Labour focus on minority opinion and minority populations. They suppress free speech and want to make it worse.
Be careful of that, because we are fighting so hard now to get respect for Jews back into the Labour Party. They're a minority population.
And I know you've been a prominent voice in fighting anti-Semitism.
And also, get real. British Muslims are here to stay. They're in the cabinet, they're on television, they're in business. Some of them are brilliant, they're in sport. And stop this use of the word minority population. I'm a minority. I'm a Catholic, I'm of Irish background. My father was Polish.
We have that in common, the Irish bit.
Yeah, he took a bullet in the war, first days of the war in 1939, came to Britain. That's why I'm here. So I think we should go easy on this minority population line.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.